Welcome to Home's Room. Just like Homeroom, we start off our day getting together with our homies, swapping stories, even a little kiss and tell action. This podcast contains language not suitable for younger listeners, topics about sex and mental health. Discretion is advised. Our views are our own. Let class begin. Welcome to Home's Room. Here with me today, fellow podcaster, movie buff, video game connoisseur, host of the What the Bleep Are You Playing podcast, Shawn. Thanks for being here in Home's Room.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm happy to come on and do this.
Yeah. So Shawn, Tom, Mason, that's the crew, right?
Yeah. Funnily enough, it was one of those where, because at the time we were starting it, I was still running the theater here in town, and I hired both of the guys that I ended up podcasting for. We were just sitting on one of those slow, I think it was like a Tuesday or Wednesday night shifts, nobody's coming in, and we're talking about just bad games and things like that. And Thomas is like, I could really talk hours on this. And I'm like, well, I really want to start a podcast. So I have an itch to always do that. Would you be willing to do this? And he's like, absolutely. And then Mason, I was just around and was like, Mason, you're joining us. He's like, I like to talk. So it just kind of happened. And then instead of just being like, talk, let's do this, we actually just sat down and started recording. And it was just something that was like, okay, yeah, let's just sit down and do this. Why not? And if people listen, cool. And I think the first episode when I put it out had like 10 downloads in like the first like 8 or 9 hours. And I was like, 10 people listen to this? I'm excited here. Yeah. It was one of those, it's like, oh, wow. There's some other human. I think the joke we made initially was like, we had a download from like, I want to say it was like Delaware, something like that. And I was like, look, I can't confirm or deny that the president of the United States has listened to our podcast, but it's a possibility here.
Yeah. I got one from Spain and one from Jamaica. And it's like, I don't know if this is real, but it's hilarious.
Exactly.
But I like that. That's yeah. The crew, I'm going to ask you a question here in a second, but the crew definitely, like, you can tell you guys have, different backgrounds, and it doesn't seem like any of the games that you play or any of the things that you review, like any one I can't remember what those graphs are called, where like the little triangle goes to different directions depending on what it is. And I like that. I like that atmosphere that you guys have. But, can you tell me a little bit about the podcast? What the Bleep Are You Playing? So
initially, it kind of was just like, we're just going to talk about video games. And as we kind of started getting in the planning process, it became all right, each of us are going to pick a game, and each week we're going to force the other people to play that game and then talk about it. Maybe the game is something that's close, near and dear to, heart, or something that we're passionate about. Or maybe it's just something that one of them was like, hey, I really want to play this bad game and I want an excuse for it, and I'm going to make you guys come along with me. And so we just kind of went with it. So like Thomas is like a huge fighting game nerd. Like he loves fighting games. So like it's an excuse to be like, I want you to play this abstract, weird fighting game. Or, me getting an excuse to be able to talk about Dragon Ball for an hour. I've done it twice now, and it's like I could talk for hours, and now I get to make you guys have to listen to me talk about it for a couple of hours. So like that's just kind of how we evolved through it. And then basically I didn't want it to be a podcast where we sat down and just like bashed on things. The growth as a person I have is that it's not about like whether the game is good or bad. It's a lot of trying to talk about what can we take from this game. And it's what I formulated. Every podcast ends with what we call the 2 important questions. First, we just ask how it holds up, because, that's a good way to talk about, okay, maybe this didn't have the best graphics, but look, this game had really good sound design, or I really like the level design and that held up, or there's different things we can talk about. And then asking the important question of like, would we like to see this game remade, reimagined in some capacity? And it gives the opportunity to, instead of just sitting like, well, is this game good or bad? And more of having that nuance of, well, what is in this game that we can take away from it? Like, we played a VeggieTales game. There's only 2 VeggieTales games out there in existence, and we played on the PlayStation 2 of all systems, Larry Boy and the Bad Apple. And look, it's an average platformer, but like that episode is us just gushing over how much fun it was to take control of Larry Boy. And so like that's kind of what I wanted the atmosphere of the podcast to be. There are times where we play something really bad and like I can get frustrated and angry and things like that, or cynicism can really come out of it. But the goal was to be like, let's just talk about these things and not always put them in like good or bad categories. Find kind of more of that middle fun ground of things, and what can we take from maybe things that aren't talked about that much.
Yeah, that I think that's the way that you've structured it is definitely fun, and you give real feedback, you give real critiques and criticisms on the game, but I do like that it's not a bashing thing. I applaud that. One of my least favorite things is people that just bash stuff. I am a huge The 100 fan. It is quite possibly my favorite show. And I found a podcast and I was going back through a rewatch and I found a podcast and I was like, oh, I'm going to listen to this podcast as I watch this because it's, kind of happening in real time. I do already know what happens, but this is somebody else that shares my nerdism for the show. I love it. And then the more I listened, the more it was making me like unhappy with the show because I didn't agree with them because they were just bashing it. And it's like, that sucks. So I'm glad that you're not doing that. Speaking of which, I just finished today the most recent episode, Mortal Kombat versus DC Universe for the PS3. And that one specifically is a really good example of like how easily you could have bashed a game, but did not, because from what I remember playing that game, and I didn't have it very long. If I remember, I played it about halfway through. The controls seemed sluggish. The fighting seemed like more difficult than it needed to be in the single player, but not fun in multiplayer. So I was like, me and my nephew played it. And then I was like, I'm going to take this back. And I, went back to GameStop, traded it in for something else. And I was expecting, you guys to be like, this game sucks. It wasn't fun. It was this. And, you kind of dove deeper into it than that. And some of the stuff you called out was like, yeah, I guess I could have appreciated that a little bit more. I could have appreciated this a little bit more. And, I think that's good. Another thing I wanted to say that's, one of those, I was waiting to see how long it would take to come up. And ding, ding, ding. This is another movie theater person from way back in the day when I used to work at a theater, and it took you 42 seconds to mention a movie theater. And I was like, I wonder how long we'll go without talking about a movie theater. But, it's something about the theater culture and entertainment in general. And, with that, like, you kind of touched on it a little bit about like how you guys decided to, jump into the podcast. But, I wondered a little bit more about, how it came about as far as like, how did you name it? What was who was steering the ship in originally? Cause it has such a fun concept that brings me back to like X-Play back in the day where like they might be kind of, you may say something negative, but it's kind of in a joking way where like, we know that it's just your opinion. It doesn't necessarily reflect the game itself. And whoever was steering the ship to get that direction did a good job, in my opinion. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
So I think one of the great things about a 3-person podcast, I've done now weirdly been a part of 5 podcasts in my life. I was thinking about it earlier today, and only one of them did not involve theater people. So like that's, going back, but like, we have 3 people with vastly different backgrounds. And so to be able to like put it together, it allows everyone to kind of do their own thing and put it all together. And like, I being the one who kind of like, I do the editing and I created the uploading and all those stuff. And I do all like the grunt work after the recording when mics are off. It's all me. So like, I kind of tried to like be the host, even though consistently I'm like, I just want to talk. So you be quiet. I'm going to talk now, instead. And so, but being able to have 2 guys who are sometimes even more opinionated than me means that like we can just go all over and then have those kind of discussions. So like Thomas came up with the name. We kind of had a little bit of ideas. We were going around ideas because there was this old podcast that I used to listen to that was like, why did I watch it or something like that? And it's no longer anywhere on the internet. It's completely gone. But it was a couple of women who like just would watch something and talk about it. It could be just a random like episode in the middle of like a season. I know what you're
talking about.
And they talk about it. And I was like, I really like this idea, but I don't want to just steal their name. And Thomas, we're playing one of the games. We have it all initially because we all worked at the theater. We had the system and all set up like to play in like the office at the theater when we weren't working. So like we would so that was our meeting spot to set up and play. And I don't remember which game it was. I don't think it's one we covered yet. And Thomas just yells like, why the F am I playing this game? And I was like, Thomas. And say that again. You know, one of those moments. Wait a second. And then he went and just kind of grabbed a stock photo and kind of designed our quick little logo. Initially, he had an opening he created that I just couldn't get it to work like sound wise. So I ended up kind of like throwing a bunch of sounds together and making it work. But like, it's one of those where like, because there's three minds coming together, there's no one person in control. Yeah. One episode may be more. We just yesterday on our kind of subset podcast, What the Bleep Are You Watching, which is our Patreon exclusive show that we use. We just watched the movie Real Steel with Hugh Jackman, and Mason and I are super passionate about that movie. Thomas was kind of so like that's an episode that like two of us are like all over it. But then if you see listen to I want to say it was either the Hydro Thunder or it was the Flat Out 2 episode of that, I'm not as passionate about those games, and the other guys are just, we're going to go off on it. So like each episode is going to have somebody bringing something a little bit more to it. And if someone isn't necessarily like, I don't have as much to add, it's not a detriment to the show.
Yeah, I think that's good. That's why I chose to have a co-host, and I explicitly, people kind of griped to me originally about like, well, you should just launch it, because I was having such a hard time finding a co-host, somebody that I felt confident with. And that, to me, that is a big part of podcasting, is knowing the direction you want to go to and sticking to those guns, and having people that have contradicting sometimes, opinions, but also aren't going to back down because you say something. It's important. And with formats like yours and mine, to be able to have somebody to bounce something off of that might have a differing of opinion, and that's okay, but not do it in like a disrespectful way. And I've heard you guys kind of get chippy, but like I can tell, even though I can't see you, I can tell that it's said with like love, like siblings almost, but not,
yes.
Not so much in a way that like as a listener it puts you off. And I think that that's a really fine line and a tightrope act that requires a lot of like respect between each other, and having three people respect each other in that regard in a room playing a game that somebody might love, two others might hate, or any combination of that. I think it's a real challenge. So it
allows us to rib on each other. Like we can just joke with each other. We've kind of started joking in every episode. Like if you had a bingo card right now, you can check that off for each episode. Thomas yells at Mason for something random or threatens violence to Mason, and then afterwards, and Thomas being such the guy that he is, he'll be like afterwards, he's like, look, I probably shouldn't have yelled at you, Mason. Like, I don't know why I did that. And Mason will be just like, cool. It was good stuff. We like it. Like we know it's all in jest. Like we know that you're not actually mad at us, or there's these sort of things. We know that like we have very different opinions, and that may mean that Mason loves the game Go Vacation. Neither Thomas or I liked that game. I loved, we played Van Helsing on the Xbox, which is it's just a Devil May Cry ripoff, but the game was so much fun. But Mason was like, this is pulling teeth for me. This is the absolute worst. And meanwhile, Thomas and I are just like, this was the most fun we've had playing a game in a while. So it allows that kind of like sibling rivalry, but also like in a way that like, even if we disagree, we're going to come back and be like, oh, that's an interesting point. Like I maybe didn't see it that way, or maybe I didn't find that enjoyment, but I like that you came up with something on it. You pulled something from this piece of media that I didn't. And maybe I'll look at that slightly in a different light, as if I ever revisit it again or something along those lines. And so it's something that we can also grow. And I think that's the most important thing that I want to take away from this podcast is that we can approach something that may be bad or maybe isn't liked or maybe you had a bad experience before, and you can take something still good from it the next time, because art changes, it's subjective, and we can learn and grow from it.
Yeah. I like that outlook, and we'll get there. We got some questions lined up, so we'll get there. We're gonna pick your brain on that. With the uptick in gamer culture and how content like what you guys are putting out, do you feel the world has finally given up the stigma of like video games will rot your brain?
I'd like to say 100% yes. I do think though there's still certain subsets that are going to always have an excuse, a reason that video games are bad. I mean, we have to look at some of the unfortunate realities in the world. Anytime there's massive gun violence, somebody's going to come out and say, well, if they hadn't played that video game, despite every study that says that's not true. Or, maybe somebody with a deep religious tie might be like, well, there's Satanism in that game. And I've had a couple of different times trying to talk about video games where people have like immediately shut it down because they have some religious belief in them that says it's bad. So like you're always going to have little bits here and there, but I really think especially as video game movies become more and more popular with things like, the Mario movie or The Last of Us on HBO, the TV show, I think that stigma that is like, oh, video games are just for weirdos and nerds and people who aren't, socially awkward or aren't good at anything. That's just what they're at. It's more of like, no, it's for everyone. Anyone can sit down and enjoy a video game, whether it's for you or not. You could find something from it. And so I think it's kind of we're getting there to the point that like it is considered at the same level of, say, a movie or a book or a piece of art. It's getting there, but we're still a little ways away, I think. But I think that step has really come. Good.
That's one of those things where, like, for me, I'm definitely not like, I wouldn't consider myself a gamer. So like I grew up in like, similarly to you in the time frame where like that was, super popular and System Wars were starting to come back around and, it was full swing at that. But, when I look at it now and I see how much stuff is, how many people are consuming game culture things and, how many people are making huge money off of video game tournaments and, playing video games. I feel like it's definitely taking steps in the right direction because, I know for me, sometimes when I need a break, a video game is the best comfort. And, when I, listening to your podcast, it's one of the things that I choose to do, at work when I need something fun to listen to. So like, full disclosure, I don't listen to every episode and I'm not binging it because I save it for the days where like, I really just need like a good shot of like, this is going to pick me up and make me feel better because it's funny. It's, especially, games that I remember, it's like a nostalgia factor. And I always think that's fun. And, you guys just did one about Def Jam Vendetta or Def Jam Fight for New York. I don't remember which one it was, but yeah. So like, that's a game that me and my sister played all the time, after school, on weekends, whatever it was. And, it takes me back to like sitting on the floor in her room playing that game. And that's a good feeling. So what you guys are doing, even though it may seem silly or it may seem, like it's a, three goofy guys having a conversation, it does mean something. And I think that that's definitely, one of the things that made me want to have this conversation with you. There we go.
Okay.
One of us froze. One of us froze, but it's all right.
Like something bad's happening here.
Good part is, they are with this platform, Riverside, when somebody freezes, there is independent audio. So your audio records, my audio records. So there's just you're doing your thing,
Nice.
I'm doing my thing. So I appreciate that. It makes editing so much simpler because all I got to do is find that spot, clip it to where we both start talking again. So,
That yeah, because we don't do a whole lot. We haven't done interviews or anything on the podcast yet. That is coming in the future. But we do have guests occasionally, and so recently we moved away from, because when we initially started, we were in it was one of the downed theaters that nothing was played in it. We sat in the front, had a table with chairs, and I had one mic set in the middle, and I could pick up all the people depending on how it was. I maybe position it a little closer to Thomas since he talks quieter than me, who yells across rooms. But then when we couldn't do that anymore, when I left the theater, we started doing an apartment, and I was like, well, the one mic is picking up a lot of stuff, and that's the thing that I'm like eventually gonna years look back and be like, why did I use that mic or things like that? So I transitioned to multiple mic setups, and I had to edit four mics because we had a guest recently, and it's like, okay, Shawn, you have to learn to not interrupt people. And then I'll be listening and editing, and I'll be like, Shawn, why are you interrupting here? Stop it. So it's actually been, I think, a good thing in the podcasting app. Ability of like, I've had to try to like look at myself when I'm talking or when I'm interacting, and like, oh, don't jump in, let them finish. Listen, Shawn, I know you're hearing things, but listen. And so like, there's weird like good human growth elements that have come from this, that it's like actually like I can look back on and I'll be like, it took me 35 years to learn some of these things, but I'm glad I'm learning this.
Well, that's good. You keep hitting the points that I want to talk to you about, because podcasting does have those elements to it. I was curious, how much research goes into the episodes? Because you guys have a lot of back end details packed into your episodes, like about releases, what was going on. Like, one of the things that like always blows my mind is like to know what other things were released in that same year. Like, I don't know how I didn't even know that. So like, it's just like, man, that did come out about the same time, didn't it?
Well, the good news is that Thomas and I have the dumbest brains possible sometimes and can just remember things. I'll sometimes be a couple years off, and then Thomas will be like, nah, that's 2009. You're thinking about, things like that. But we, with three of us, we kind of all do our own little bit of independent research coming in. I mean, the big thing is like, hey, I have Wikipedia. I think I've joked in several of the episodes, here's Shawn reading Wikipedia today, and things like that. But like, there'll be something on Wikipedia, I'm like, I want to see if I can find a little more on this. And maybe that's just going over another page. Maybe that's going in more in depth on things like that. Cause the goal is not to like provide false information. And so like anytime that we're like unsure of something, we're like, hey, I've heard this. I think this is, maybe one day it'll be proven wrong. Or maybe somebody will be like, someone will listen and be like, nah, actually, that's not what happened. But like trying to at least give a picture of a lot of these games is really important. So like recent one, Mortal Kombat versus DC Universe, it was really important to talk about how that game was rushed and how all of the behind the scenes stuff is kind of the reason why we got this product. Because it's easy just to sit on and talk about, oh, well, the game's ugly and it doesn't work quite right. It's a lot more nuanced to sit down and find the points of the game that are like, why did it become that? And we don't always cover that on every game because there's different topics that we want to, but especially when we talk about games that are like universally like, this thing's bad or this is this, it's important to try to find a little bit of why that might be that way. And so like, it depends on the game, on what level of research go into, but I don't like to go into the game without having at least read 2 or 3 articles on the game, and try to read a couple of reviews to kind of like, not necessarily to like get a feeling for the game, but more of a feeling of, okay, what did people think back then? And I know Thomas loves to watch revisits of games and games revisited. He talks a lot about those sort of things, like this game revisited 10 years later. And so he'll talk about that. So it kind of comes from a lot of different places of where we were when the game came out. Mason will consistently joke, I was not born yet, or I was
Yeah, I've heard that.
in diapers. So like there's different impacts of when a game came out, what we were doing when it came out, to then be able to get a feeling of that time frame before talking about the game, because it's easy to, in a 2023 mindset, hey, I just played brand new PS5 game, to then go back and play, something on the PlayStation 1 and be like, wow, this sucks because it's compared to this one. Well, there's a little more nuance to that because of what led into it. So I think that's really important. And I hope it comes through the podcast, because like we really try to like put it in context of the year it came out more than now. And I think that's where the question I liking to ask, how does it hold up? Because then we can then put it in context of like, look, back then, and if it's a really bad game, we're like, yeah, that game didn't hold up back then. It definitely doesn't hold up now, but that gives a little nuance into it.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, like, that's one of those things where I personally think that you guys do a really good job of that. And, you end up having enough information where I can appreciate, the effort that goes into it. I like to do research on my guests that I have on here, or, whatever topic we're covering. And, as it stands now, you've heard a few of the episodes, and, we put in enough effort on the front end so the guests come on and feel comfortable, and it doesn't seem like I'm just like, hey, I don't know anything about any of the things. The episode that will be airing for us in past time to this coming week, that person I met on the internet that day. She posted a question and was like, hey, does anybody want to do an interview? I wrote a book. And her post was just vague enough that I was like, this girl's got balls. I'm going to reach out to her and see what her book is. And then she was like, hey, thanks for messaging me. Sorry, I totally forgot to put the title of my book in the post. And I was like, I thought that was on purpose, because it made me come to you to be like, what's your book called? Because I wanted to go look it up. And, from that point forward, it was like, hey, I got some time today if you want to record. And she was like, funny enough, I got some time. So I tried to search her as much as I could. I read her profiles on everything I could find her on, and did, all of the research that I could to go into that episode prepared. And I think that, you guys are definitely doing that work. And as a person that doesn't know enough about games to comment on games, it makes me feel like, oh, I learned something today. And that's what Home's Room is about, which is, again, why it was like, I definitely wanted to have you on here. Was a little nervous to ask, because I had no idea whether you would say yes or no, but here you are.
Yeah, I'm always excited to talk. The one skill I have in life is just rambling on and talking about things that sometimes I know a lot about and sometimes I don't. One thing my father gave me was just talking.
Fair enough. So the obvious question when you have somebody on who like reviews stuff, what's been the biggest surprise, like enjoyable game for you?
Good question. So like we honestly have, the majority of games have been something fun. There's only a couple that I'm just like, ugh. Van Helsing on the Xbox was really surprisingly fun. Like that was just a blast to play. I mentioned earlier Larry Boy and the Bad Apple. Some of that was just, VeggieTales nostalgia. But I think honestly, recently when we played Gundam Battle Assault 2 on the PlayStation, and some of that was like, there were 4 of us played in a room and passing controllers around, and it felt like being a kid again. We just needed a couple of 2 liters of Mountain Dew, and it was just, I was back in the 90s and early 2000s again. That was really, really fun to play. I think the biggest surprise for me in terms of just any game, we played X-Men 2 Wolverine's Revenge on the GameCube. And the game is hard. It is so hard, but like rewarding and fun. And like, I think, because it did not get great reviews back in the day. And I think it's one of those that like people played the first level and just were like, nah, done. And I actually sat down and maybe pulled some old skill that is look, I found the cheat codes and maybe got my way to the end and played the final boss. But I think that's probably the most surprising. Like, I expected this to be just kind of a slog, and I think I sat down and played that game for like 7, 8, 9 hours in the lead up, which, like, at the time, still being working, 50 hours a week to find 6 hours to play a GameCube game. That's a credit to that game. And I think that podcast episode is one of those where, like, look, we know this game isn't as good as, like, we're kind of glowing about, and we're going to talk about a lot of problems in this game, but we really enjoyed playing it despite all of that. And I think that's just the thing that's kind of come from this podcast as a whole, is just a lot of these games, they didn't get, like, maybe love initially, but we can just sit down and have fun playing them. And especially with all the fighting games we've played recently, we've played a ton of them. Like, we're just sitting in a room, and playing for 3-4 hours to get a feel of it, and playing a lot of the multiplayer. And that's an aspect of video games that kind of has faded over the years with online and people not necessarily hanging out at friends' house to play 2-player games. And so it's just been really fun to be able to do that and kind of get that nostalgia itch, and then be like, there's going to be a passion when we record afterwards, because we just had a whole lot of fun playing this game. So whether we're going to critique it or go hard on it or not, it's an element of, we just had a whole lot of fun doing this. So, like, even if it's a bad game, it's fun. And I think that's something that in making this podcast, I'm so happy that has been growing. And it is that, like, it hasn't devolved into cynicism. It hasn't devolved into us just being like, well, this is hated on, and so we're going to hate it. It's more of like, look, you can have fun in a bad game, and we're going to talk about it, and we're going to tell you that this is the worst camera we've ever seen, or these graphics are not good, or wow, why did they do this control? But we're also going to be like, but if you pick this character, or you do this on this level, or you have this sort of thing, you can have an absolute blast in this game.
Yeah, I think that comes across, and you can tell, that you guys have your excitement, and, online gaming, playing with somebody in a different country or, a different state, whatever it is, I think is, that's cool. But I do think that when you can get together and, it's reminiscent of, like, N64 with 4 controllers on a Friday night in a rented game, that's like the, quintessential 90s 2000s kid right there. Like you said, just a jug of or a bottle of Mountain Dew and a couple of buddies. I think that it shows, but also, like I said, you guys have you hit a good nostalgia factor. You mentioned the Gundam game, and I was gonna listen to that episode today, but I was in, like, a decent enough mood that I wanted to hear, like, a good episode. And that one is, like, one that I distinctly remember playing with my friends constantly, and we'd play through it and then take turns. When somebody would die, you just pass the controller. And I was like, I'm gonna save that one for when I'm really bored, because I want to enjoy an episode that, like, brings me back, and it's like, oh, I forgot about that part, or, oh, I forgot that was annoying, or, like, oh, I didn't like that, or I did like this, but you guys disliked it, and think about it, because it puts you in a place of, like, introspection. And I don't know that you intend that, but I think you do a really good job of, like, sharing that camaraderie, sharing that, like, that feeling. And the games that you just talked about being the best makes me ask the next question of, what's the biggest disappointment?
I mean, the game that I disliked the most was the second game we played, Go Vacation, on the Wii. Albeit it has one of my favorite quotes in a podcast, is because one of the it's resort games where you're playing with the Wiimote, and they have you, like, jerking off the Wiimote for whatever reason at one point, and, like, I'm just talking about, like, I am angry at this game, and it's making me wank right now. I am anger wanking. And so, like, even in a game that was disappointing and not necessarily fun, and we harass Mason with it all the time just for fun, but, like, there's still something that we could get and have fun talking about it. Probably though, the absolute biggest disappointment, that probably is the biggest disappointment. I think as far as like playing through it all, a lot of it, the episode where we did Ben 10 was kind of disappointing, simply because I just don't have a connection to Ben 10. By the time that became a popular TV show, I was, 19 years old. And so like, it didn't hit me. And so like, I just didn't get a whole fun out of that game, albeit I did beat the game. But it's G.I. Joe Rise of Cobra. That's the answer. That game was so boring and bland. And that episode is the one that I like. I'll go back and if I'm looking for clips or things like that to edit something or look through things, and I'm like, oh, we had nothing to say because this game was just blank. Like there was just nothing. So we're excited that we're gonna cover the movie here soon, so we can at least have more gushing about G.I. Joe. Whereas that game was just it was just a dud. It was just a dud of a game. It was a PS3 arcade, like top down third person shooter, and it had no flair and really wasn't very fun. So like it made for an episode where we're just like, yeah, we don't got a lot to say about this this game. So here's Thomas to gush about G.I. Joe and why he loves it so much.
Yeah. I don't think that is a like blip on the radar. Like I barely remember that being a game. And then as soon as you said it, I was like, oh, that was a game, wasn't it? Yeah, I can imagine that one being pretty bad. Moving into, kind of more like podcaster ishness for you. Where do you, as a host of a gaming podcast, where do you see the gamer culture going in the future?
Ooh, that's a good one. I mean, I'm kind of a little bit of like on the outside of some of the gamer stuff because I'm just not like Fortnite or the arena shooter person. So like they'll be funny. I'll be talking to people or friends and they'll be like, yeah, I was doing this. And I was like, just not really me. But I think the big thing for gamer culture more than anything, and I don't think it's going to be this season, but next season we are covering Call of Duty. And so that's a good, like that's kind of the big, like cultural, like online where all the trolls exist and all the like, the negativity of gaming culture kind of comes from in that like aspect. I think that like, as we move forward in games, as more and more games, become more inclusive, I think is the thing that I like really, and as I play it, like, I think that culture is going to grow into a way that like, it doesn't feel as like exclusive as it's more accepting on the outside. And as people are more playing the games are more, accepting of what's coming around. And as games present, better, race, sexuality, gender in them, I think that's something that we're going to see as at least as a gaming culture. There's still going to be subsets, but I think that's where the biggest growth is going to come on, is seeing that. And that's why it's really cool when I sit down and play games that I love and things like that like I think through that lens a little more. I think a little more lens, and it helps because my best friend is trans, and the Gundam episode I referenced, we had I think the joke on it at the beginning was that trans Gundam fan that your mother warned you about is I think how I introduced Jazz on it. And having that inclusivity and looking through that lens on games more and more and more of like, okay, does this culture or does this game accept? Is it accepting? Is that what we're seeing? And I think that's the way I want to move my thought and culture. And I hope that's how gamer culture moves forward. Some of that may just be optimistic dreamer that I am, but also there's an element of I've seen it move that direction a lot more as different bigger franchises become more inclusive in what they do.
Yeah, that's a good one. I think that that's, a good direction. And I hope that you are correct. That's one of the things that, I appreciate about a lot of the culture. And that's one of the things that like I want to do here is give people that voice, give people that opportunity to talk and push something in a direction that like is more positive. Like I don't like to talk about politics on here, not because I'm afraid to, but because you're beat over the head with that. I enjoy podcasts like yours where you're putting something back into the world with a little bit of like cynicism, but also, a lot of bit of humor. And I think that that's, important right now. And I hope that that's what we're doing. So
Definitely.
like I said, moving into like the podcaster questions, you touched on it a little bit, but, how has podcasting changed you? Is there any way in particular that like you feel like is a night and day difference?
So the first ever time I podcasted, we're talking back in '06. And that was with a bunch of us guys at the theater. It was like me, Nathan, Corey, and Nolan. And we sat down and we recorded. And while that was a lot of fun back then, I always am remembering like, man, we just kind of bashed on some things at times, like not like individually, but like, man, we were just snobby and opinionated, which has a lot, isn't necessarily a bad thing. There is room for anything on that. But that's why when approaching this podcast, and then what I think the biggest growth in it is like being able to look into something and find stuff in it to talk about, and not necessarily that it just is bad. And some of that is finding the right people to talk to, having the right, co-hosts, but also having the right guests for right episodes.
Mm-hmm.
We did a WWE episode, and one of my friends was like, "Oh, I really want to talk about WWE," and I was like, "Cool, come on, we'll have you on, join in." And it still is my best opening, as I had like, introduced all of the network people, and then I was like, "And from the top rope," so like what the thing that podcasting has allowed me to kind of like look at myself in a way that I didn't expect. I actually recently posted a clip of an episode that's going to come out next Monday on the Patreon, where we looked at the movie Lucky Number 11, and
Yeah.
a movie that I loved when I was it came out like I was like 8 months at the theater. I was like not long there. I was new and like, I'm going to be like this critic, and I'm going to, and this, I'm going to sit here and I'm like, look at this movie. It's so smart. And we sat back and we kind of like looked at it. I was like, look, I still enjoy this movie, but like a lot of why I enjoyed that movie is kind of the flaws that were me at 18. And so like being able to come back and look at things, and also while podcasting with someone who is so much younger than me, Mason being 20 years old, being able to like have a lot of those same, like those opinions that I had back then, and be like, well, look, Mason, see, like you have this now, but like, I'm talking about seeing it 15 years later, this is, growth. And in that clip, it was like, Thomas was like, well, look, it would fit you, Shawn, for it being an 18-year-old and being kind of arrogant and, a little bit of an asshole. And so I was like, yeah, there's growth there. And I think that's the biggest thing that I've taken from any type of time when I turn on a mic and I talk and put my voice out in the world is learning that words matter. And even when I'm going a million miles an hour and I'm stumbling over myself and maybe my point isn't as clear, you can tell sometimes from that, if there's passion in a way positively, that it's going to come through a lot better than if it's passion in a negative way. And it's going to come through that a lot of that feeling is going to come through to your audience, or even to the people that you're with. It's like, yeah, you may have just talked quickly and said gobbledygook about nothing, but like there was absolute love for what you were talking about, and you weren't hating on any person or anything, and that came through. And that's been able to be like me to be able to process my own faults, I guess, that like and how I am and how I talk and how things, and be like, no, look, if I cultivate and I make sure that I'm looking this way and things, I'm going to look at other things in life, and I'm going to look at other things in different ways. And I won't get down on myself because I'm looking for like, hey, I did something good here, or hey, you went out and made this project and it didn't work, but at least look at what you did fine on it, and I can look at a lot of the failed things I've done, and realize that there's a creative side that exists that is okay with mistakes. And that's something that I've had to learn a lot of, and I'm still learning. Like, I edited an episode today, that's going to come out in weeks at this point. But I edited it, and I'm sitting there, and a lot of it's like, Shawn, why? And a lot of that is just, well, it's because you're just learning and you're growing, and you're going to look back at the next episode 5 years ago, like, wow, Shawn, why did you do that? But I learned from it. I grew and I did that. And we joke on the podcast a lot, or after or around it, like, we're going to be doing this for decades, how long this podcast, or who knows how long it's going to last, and who knows how long it's going to go, who knows how long we're going to do it. But we're going to look back at it, and there's always going to be something we can take from it. And I think that's the biggest thing. It's just like, all of life is just you figuring and growing things out. And this is kind of maybe the catalyst for me that was like, oh yeah, you're growing, bud. You may think that you're an adult, but you need to learn to grow more. And I absolutely love that. And when listening to your podcast, I've picked that up from a lot of different people as well. And I've been able to look at that, and I'm like, look, we're all at different places, and we're all growing in different ways, and we're all doing different things. And it's really cool to see that, and to see the ability to be like, yeah, you don't need to be as hard on yourself, improve, but you don't need to like beat yourself up over everything.
Yeah. I think that, like I said, that's the biggest thing. And I love, everything you said just there. I think that, for anybody listening, it becomes, I don't know if it's an age thing, if it's an arrogance thing, if it's I don't know what it is, but I do know that when you decide to look back at yourself and be kind of introspective, you can decide to make those changes, or you could decide to see, I said something stupid and I'm glad I'm not that naive, or I'm glad I'm not that vain, or whatever it is. I think that's good. So I wanted to ask you, trying to, real quick, if somebody was thinking about starting a podcast, what would you tell them? Like, advice, or, do it, don't do it, the level of detail and work it takes, like, what would you tell them?
My biggest thing is just do it. Like, that's just the thing. Like, just get out and do it. Now, you may not find success if you're just like sitting in a room and just talking to yourself. But like, if you have a passion to record and want to talk about something, do it. Like I always used to use the excuse like, well, I don't have a good mic, or I don't have a good computer, or I don't have blank. And it's like, but it's what you're saying that's important. And if you think you have something that's interesting to share to the world, and that people want to hear, or that you have people that want to hear it, do it. Like, that's the thing that like always holds us back, or at least it's definitely held me back more than anything. It's like, I've always found an excuse not to do something. And I think that's where finding the people to do it with has been important, because I will, there are a lot of times where I'll make plans, or I'll dream something, and I'm like, yeah, I want to do this. And then, a week later, I'll be like, I can't do it. And that's where having Thomas, especially, because he is so particular about planning and things out and putting things on schedule. Like, we have seasons mapped out, because he wants to like map out and do all these things, and like what we're going to do, and all these sort of things. And that kept me on a schedule that I had to go and do it. And so like, that's nice. The thing is like, make that plan, set that plan, do it. And you may go back and you may edit your podcast. You may look at it and be like, I don't think that was very good. And that's okay. That's okay. It's all a process. And like, I think that's the biggest thing is like that. There's an episode I was super excited for. It was our season finale. It was Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time, one of my favorite games of all time. I love it. And I had these new mic setups, and I set it all up, and then I go to edit, and I'm like, I can't hear Thomas. I legitimately cannot hear him a lot of time. I had to boost his volume on the back end so much. That episode is hard to hear. It's not. And I literally, like, there was almost a day of me just sitting there going, how did I mess this up? Like, how did I mess
Yeah.
this up and beating myself up? But like, that's going to happen. You're going to have things that are you're going to have mistakes. You're going to have things that are out of your control. And maybe in 3 or 4 seasons, we come back and we talk about Prince of Persia again, and I'll get to say some of those things level, and it'll be the best episode ever. And that's okay. It said, so if I ever can tell somebody whether they want a podcast, become a Twitch streamer, YouTube videos, whatever it is in this sort of media, things, do it. Just go out and do it. You're going to get better the more you do it.
Awesome. I love that. Rolling into the final segment of this or that. So, just like real quick answers. If, you just got to pick between these two things. So the first one, you can only play fighting games with a slow controller response, or you can only play racing games like Mario Kart, Sonic, anything that requires like racing or like a thing against time with a twitchy controller. Which one you choosing?
I think I'm going with the twitchy controller simply because the slow response, I already am slow responding in a fighting game. I'm going to get my ass handed to me. At least with the twitchy controller, I might stand a chance in a racing game to like if it's Mario Kart, hey, look, I'm just going to get on that medal stand. I'm just going to get on that medal stand.
I like the outlook. All right. Passing time with the best movie or the best video game?
They both have their value, and absolutely, I can see arguing for both. I think it's going to be video game, and this comes through sometimes on our top 5 episodes. So we do the interludes where we rank some stuff because I love to rank things. And the last couple of times we've done it, it's ended with me talking about emotionally why a game was the reason I did things. When I got divorced, I sat down and I played the game Kingdom Hearts, and I played it for weeks on end. And in a lot of ways, it's the only thing that got me through the tough time in my life. So like, it's going to be a game because like you can play for 20, 30 hours on a big game, and you can feel emotional impact. So that's what I'm going to go with.
That is not the answer I was expecting. As far as like the reasoning why, I figured you'd go game because for the reason, just not like so impactfully. That was well spoken. So the last one, gotta find my place because you just like hit me in the feels and I lost my spot. Being able to have your hand in creating a game or having a hand in making a game that has been previously released retooled to be perfect.
Ooh. So like I tried to get into video game development when I was younger, and I realized it was all about art, and I'm like, well, I can't do art, so I'm screwed. So like that was like this dream that I had, and so it always was. I think the passion that has come out of this podcast is that I love remakes of games, and I love reimaginings of games. So like being any part, like whether rewriting a story a little bit to change it up a little bit, or, oh, maybe we tighten the controls a little bit more on this game, or you know what, maybe this level needs to be expanded a little bit more. We just covered the Simpsons game, which will air in May. And that's a game that is really funny, has great writing and dialogue, and is funny. And the game is just kind of meh. And like the thing that we came in while talking about that was like, God, we'd like a Simpsons game that like was good, but still this funny, but was really good. So like, I think retooling is what I would want to do.
Good answer. I like that one. I think I would agree. Like, if I could go back and fix, some racing games, I do know like my forte, and everybody on this podcast knows I talk about racing a lot, and that's my coping mechanism. But I used to play, it's IHRA Drag Racing 2 by Bethesda Softworks, and it is probably my favorite racing game of all time, simply because you could actually build the parts, you could build the motors, you could like literally put in a number in a field to create this motor, where a lot of games are like level 1, level 2, level 3, and that doesn't do anything. The drag racing controls on it were so complex. It took a steering wheel to really be able to play it. And
Yes.
I loved that aspect. And I want a game like that to come out now. And I would love any of the new like racing games, like your Midnight Clubs, your, Forzas, all of those to come out with the ability to build a motor. I could take a racing catalog, take the specs from that motor, put it into that game, take the specs from a transmission, put it into that game, and feel like I was driving that car and see how much power it made. And I think that's something that, like, if I could retool a game now, that's what I would do. I would love to be able to do that. And, similar to the gaming culture, the car culture is going towards computers, is going towards being able to manipulate computer programs. And, if you can do that, if you have a passion for that, there's a lot of room for it. So I think having that now, and that game was, I mean, that game is old. The graphics are awful. So I can only tell you it was on PlayStation 2. So like that tells you how long ago, but I think retooling is good.
The PS2 steering wheel was one of my favorite peripherals ever. We had one, and my brother and I played Burnout 3 with it all the time. Yeah. And I'm a sucker for funky controllers. I love different types of controllers, steering wheels. There's a whole bit in one of our episodes where we talk about the Resident Evil 4 chainsaw controller. So I love controllers. So just you saying like, oh, I played on controller, I was like, oh, I would play any game if I could have, the steering wheel.
That, like I said, I think that it makes a difference, and to me, it impacts. Like I have a sim rig. Like I said, I race, so I have a sim rig, and I have racing harnesses. I'm sitting in a racing seat now, but I have racing harnesses on my sim rig because I found that like my posture was just weird, so I couldn't drive, and it was strange. So that was annoying. And I got harnesses, like a 4-point harness. And it made my shifting better. It made my steering wheel movement a little bit crisper because I wasn't tucking my elbows because I'm just sitting in a chair with a steering wheel. And that level of realism, like for a lot of people would be like silly, but for this particular situation, it's like, I don't care. It makes that game funner.
Exactly.
More fun, funnest, funnier, whatever it is. But just real quick, I want to thank you for supporting, the show. I think, for us, it's always about support and, supporting people who are doing the work. And, we really appreciate it because that's the kind of culture and community that we're trying to build is, support. So no matter what you're doing, no matter what's going on, I think that the support that you've shown and, the messages you sent and sharing things and all that, I think that is, what Home's Room is trying to do is get people more comfortable saying, damn, good job.
Yeah, there's an element that I always haven't been good at, and I had to learn. And I think this could go back to what did podcasting teach you, but also like what did streaming, Twitch streaming, what did podcast teaching, like things like that was like, oh, you're not going to make it by yourself. Like you have to talk to people, you have to communicate, you have to watch other people and talk to them and tell them what they're doing. And so like the moment you like posted like doing a podcast, I was like, oh my gosh, that's awesome. Like I know that you have a lot of great opinions and a lot of things you could talk about. And like we've talked before many times, like it's like, I was like, that's just awesome. And so like being able to reach out, whether the person or anything like that, just like to be able to like, be able to talk and critique, but also like tell people they're doing well. Like, just yesterday, I was talking with a guy who does a Final Fantasy podcast. I'm in his Discord and I was talking to it, and I said he was getting all down because like their podcast has like 16 reviews, but 2 of them were just like the most hateful things on the planet. And I basically was just like, look, if you could just look at one good review, like you're going to feel so much better. And I have 1 review on my Apple podcast. We have 1 review, and I look at it every week or so when I'm feeling down. It's just like, these guys are awesome. And I'm like, that's all you need sometimes. It's just one person to say, hey, you're doing a good job. And it'll motivate you to continue working because it's hard sometimes to get you're like, am I doing well? Am I doing well? And that doesn't mean there can't be room for critiques or saying, hey, I wish, maybe if you covered that or something like that, or hey, you want to do that. But like, it is so important to reach out to people. And this is something that I've struggled with my whole life. So this is talking from the heart here. Tell the people that you know that are doing things that they're doing well or that you appreciate, or even if you're just like, hey, I listened to your podcast. It's going to mean the world. My brother gave me the compliment recently, was like, hey, Shawn, your podcast is good. And I was like, it was said in a way, and he's like, I don't mean that like, I didn't think it was going to be good, but he's like, I didn't expect it to be good. Like, and actually that level, he's like, you guys are a lot better than I expected. And I immediately texted the guys. I was like, you got to hear this compliment he gave me. And it's like, it means the world. So like, I've tried to almost every episode that you guys aired to at least say, hey, like, this is what I got from it. This is what I said from it. Like, especially the last episode I listened to, I was like, I did not expect to get anything from this episode. And I came away being like, I'm motivated so much by what I just listened to. Like, I did not expect this. Like, kudos, man. I did not expect this. So like, just reach out, tell the people, hey, I listened. It means the world. It cannot be stated how much it means to just hear, I listened to your episode.
Yeah. So the episode he's talking about is Home's Room with the Vixen, one half of a lifestyle couple. And I was nervous about that episode, not because like I have an issue, but because I didn't know how well it was going to be received or not received. I didn't know who was going to listen to it. I didn't know what was going to happen as far as, like culture shock, but I believe in being completely open. And, that was one of those things where like, I wanted to have that conversation. And as we sit now, I want to have more of those conversations, but, I was worried about the feedback I was going to get, not because I'm worried or ashamed or I felt like I wasn't going to be able to handle it, but because I didn't want to have to tell people off. And, I've gotten so much like, man, that was a good episode. I didn't know what to expect. And, you messaging me what you did, like you said, I thought that like, I thought it was a good conversation, and I knew that she was a writer, and I did my research on her. So I knew where I wanted that interview to go. And I knew that she was going to have a story to tell that was like, although this is outside of the, social norms for most people, what it is at its heart is, somebody that just like you and I creating podcasts is a creator and doing things that come naturally to all of us, but and in her own way. And I think that, anybody that got anything from that episode or any of my episodes, are huge. And I think that, what you've said is, pretty awesome. Before I ask you where they can find everything, I just want to give you a second to shout out your boys. If you want to say anything to them that they get to hear through this interview, just real quick, what you got?
I just am so thankful that I found the right people to do things with. Like words can't always come just how amazing they are. Like that's just they have taken an idea that, I maybe had bits of it at different times, and we've been able to run with it and build it. And I couldn't do it by myself. And if I only had one of them, I don't think would have. They are most important people in any creative is having, having people around you that can help and build and have visions, even if they're not the same visions, to build it. So like Thomas and Mason are the greatest, and I love them so much. And I'm so thankful that I hired them. That's the thing. Like I'm so thankful I hired them at a different job so we could connect.
There you go. Shout out to you guys for doing what you do and keeping the I always say, here the inmates are running the asylum, and I don't know if you feel the same way, but that's where I get. So real quick, what and where can they find What the Bleep Are You Playing?
So What the Bleep Are You Playing? We're on pretty much every single podcasting app, Apple, iTunes, Spotify, Pandora, Stitcher, Google, Samsung, Audible. It's on everything. Like there may be only like one or two out there that that they're not going to find it. So initially I made the name basically impossible to search. So like that's when initially the name was like a bunch of like symbols instead of bleep, and like nobody could find it. And I was like, okay, we need to fix this. So but you could find on any of those. And if you'd want to, they're also all of our episodes of What the Bleep You Playing, as well as What the Bleep You Watching, is on our Patreon, patreon.com/whatthebleep. And we're going to have 2 or 3 other types of shows that are going to eventually show up on there. We've got a idea we're still workshopping of how the bleep I would do it, where we take an idea and then expound on how we would do it. I think the big one we're going to be tackling is the Universal Monsterverse, how we would do the Universal Monster Universe.
Ooh.
So
Nice.
that's where those are going to be. And we've just created just a place, it's Patreon. It's a $3 tier to subscribe and get all the episodes, or we created a $15 tier that was like, hey, you want to tell us what to watch or play? Give us $15 and we'll do it.
I like it.
So we're all over. There's plenty of places to support free just to listen, or, if you like it, I never turn down money. I'm the whore in that way.
Good. Well, go check out some episodes. Go leave a review for What the Bleep Are You Playing. Also for Home's Room, because hopefully you enjoyed what you just heard, and hopefully you've been following along and enjoying. I just can't thank you enough for being here, Shawn. I am glad that we have reconnected, and I'm glad that we are still able to support each other. We've come a long way from, Hauntings of Molly Hartley and other stupid, terrible things that we had to watch. And, the things that we would argue about and could never agree on. And then the one things that we could agree on, every once in a while. Like I said, I appreciate you being here so much. I am so amazed at what you've been able to do and what I've been able to do, and how we've been able to come together in certain ways to, continue that over, the span of decades now, almost
decades.
Yeah.
It's been, I said, we watched Lucky Number 11, which came out 17 years ago. And my realization of, oh my God, it's been 17 years since I worked at the theater.
Yeah. That's crazy. But like I said, I just wanted to say thank you one more time.
Absolutely.
You have a great day, sir. It's actually daytime, which is a good thing, because usually it's nighttime when I record. So I appreciate you coming on here early.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on. Thanks.
The bell is about to ring. If you want to drop us a voice message or simply ask a question, you can do that by clicking the link in the show notes below. Be sure to leave us a 5-star review. It helps more people find us. Theme music by Kinsey. More music available on Spotify. Remember, every day is a class. Go learn something.